when you look at the downfall of the Bruins the last few years, which it is a downfall. They finished 15th in the Eastern Conference last year, and 2 years before, they set the wins and points record. When you look at that, when you look at the downfall, there's a pretty simple issue at the crux of all of it. Okay? The same problem for the Boston Bruins is the same one that's facing churches, landline phone companies, Florida. They aged out. There's no young talent. They've had a roster management problem because they've had a development problem. They've had a development problem mainly because they have a talent evaluation problem. If they could identify and develop young talent, there would be none of this, well, they were bound to suck at some point. There wouldn't have to be that. Expert teams could find their way around that. And the Bruins were actually in a spot to continue having a pretty good team if they just could evaluate talent or develop talent. It wouldn't have to be the way that we're talking about it now. You traded a lot of picks, and no one's really knocking you for that. We love that you went all in as much as you did, Don Sweeney, because you had teams that could go all in. But still, you did have plenty of opportunity to keep this era going if you were halfway competent at drafting and developing. I mean, need we look any further than the start of it? 2015. Not to bring up those skeletons. But 3 straight picks in the first round, and he doesn't really hit on any of them. When the one he does hit on would have been a guy who in the redraft still would have been 15th in the draft in Jake DeBrusk. So there was plenty of opportunity for the Bruins to kind of keep this thing going. They haven't yet because they don't draft and develop talent. So when Don Sweeney was looking for a head coach this spring, he had 2 options, right? You can go out and you can get the seasoned guy, the defined structure, style, experience winning in the NHL, or you could go the cheaper, easier to control route, and you can find the developer. Don Sweeney, of course, did the latter. Cheap, doesn't want to bring in his own assistant coaches, will kind of let me run the show. Of course, that's where Don Sweeney went. And the Bruins, to me, sent a pretty clear message this summer with how they handled free agency and the trade market so far, and that is win with what you got. We're not bringing in talent, so you, Marco Sturm, are going to have to find the talent in the guys you already have on the roster and in the pipeline. And if you read between the lines of Sturm's resume, you can see that he does develop talent. Like, does it still upset me that the Boston Bruins are an entry-level job? Yes, it does. But what upsets me more is when the Bruins hired him, they're playing up, oh, it's this fan favorite coming home angle. Remember when he scored at Fenway? When he was hired, it was literally his tweet after tweet, man, video after video of him scoring that goal. And I'm thinking, we don't want this. We don't want to just have another member of the family. We're sick of that. And to me, it's kind of insulting to Marco Sturm. Like, yeah, he had a pretty good playing career, right? He played 940 games in the NHL. Played a long time. But he has been a coach somewhere else. And he's never worked for the Bruins or any of their coaches or their GM. So just tell me what this guy can do. I don't give a shit about the goal he scored outside 15 years ago. I could not care less when it comes to how I'm picking my coach. You know, ask the old Arizona Coyotes fans how they felt about having Wayne Gretzky. He scored a lot of goals as their coach. Like, if you've watched the rise of the LA Kings the last couple of years, and they have been one of the best teams in hockey, even though they kick it past Edmonton, they have been one of the best teams in hockey. And if you've watched them the last few years, you know what Marco Sturm can do because you've seen the young core of that team. And in some ways, that does perfectly align with where the Bruins are at right now. So Sturm was an assistant for the Kings before coaching the Ontario Reign in the AHL. That was his most recent job the last 3 years. And when he was an assistant with the big club, a winger named Quinton Byfield rose through the ranks. And he was a winger for a little bit there. And he plays 40 games in the NHL as a 20-year-old. And then he's sent back down to the AHL the next year. This is a kid who was the number 2 pick in the draft. He gets 40 games at the NHL level, and they send him down. And then he's playing for the new Ontario Reign coach, Marco Sturm. And under Sturm in the AHL, Byfield scored 16 points in 15 games and was right back up in the NHL, scored 55 points the next year. Through the early time in the NHL and the time he had in the AHL, like that crucial development, that's Marco Sturm. Another guy, Adrian Kempe. Remember, you know Adrian Kempe scored 40 goals a couple years ago. Before that, he was learning under Marco Sturm. Credits a lot of his development to him. Brandt Clarke, really highly rated guy, another top 10 pick. He plays a couple of games in the NHL. He scores. He's on the score sheet. He played about 10 games in the NHL. He's feeling good about himself. And then not only does Brandt Clarke get sent down to the CHL, but then the next year, after starting the year in the AHL, the next year, he's in the AHL for 50 games. We talk about it in hockey, but a lot of baseball, right? These guys who come up and then you send them back down, that's got to kill their confidence. So he goes and plays 50 games for Marco Sturm for the Ontario Reign. Huge prospect. And all he does is become almost a point-a-game player as a defenseman. 46 points in 50 games. And now he's seen as one of the futures of that franchise. Those are three real big pieces of the LA Kings, one of the best teams in the Western Conference, a team much better than the Bruins, who have a really bright future that Marco Sturm has a direct hand in without being the head coach of the LA Kings. And for Sturm here, his work's cut out for him. Okay? Because finally, we've got prospects in Boston, finally. But they're not that good. That guy isn't coming until next year, okay? They're not that highest echelon like what the Kings had. Matthew Poitras, Fraser Minton, Fabian Lysell, like those guys could be and maybe should be NHL contributors by now, but they're not top 10 picks, okay? But here's where I'm going to trust Marco Sturm in terms of developing these guys at the NHL level rather than the AHL level. And the reason I'm going to trust him is because the Kings always integrated these guys into the lineup the right way. The way that I have been criticizing the Bruins, the way the Bruins have been doing it for years. They do it the Kings do it the exact opposite. And I know this is a much used and oft used criticism of Don Sweeney, but when Quinton Byfield was coming up in his first, year or two, Adrian Kempe, same thing. They were on the ice, like time on ice, just as long as Matthew Poitras and Fabian Lysell have been. But the difference is they got more of a chance with those 12, 13 minutes a night. The Kings guys did. Byfield comes up and he's playing on a line with Adrian Kempe and Trevor Moore, game one. And there's a lot of his early part of his career where he's playing on a line, again, because he's on the wing for a little bit. He's playing on a line with Adrian Kempe and Anze Kopitar. Another bright young star alongside him in Kempe and a savvy veteran, future Hall of Famer in Anze Kopitar. When Kempe came up into the fold, he was playing with Kopitar and Tyler Toffoli, 30-goal guy in the NHL. The Kings were bringing a team along as they were bringing these prospects along. They weren't in a full rebuild. They weren't completely tanking. They had some good pieces there, but they knew they needed to integrate these young guys into the lineup, and they knew they were coming along, but they needed a real chance to play with real NHL players. The Bruins are in the same boat, man. They're in the same boat. And you look at those Kings teams of, 4 or 5 years ago is what we're talking about now. They weren't loaded with talent either, They could put Anze Kopitar on a line with Quinton Byfield and Adrian Kempe. I think Dustin Brown, towards the end of his career, was playing a little bit with Quinton Byfield too. But it's not like they had 4 lines deep where they had a 20-goal scorer on every line. They could just plug guys in. They were using some of the limited talent they had to play with the young guys, Kempe and Byfield, and bring them along. So for Poitras and Lysell and Minton, Blumel, Mason Lohrei even, give them a chance. Give them a chance here. Spread them up and down the lineup. Have the centers play some shifts with Pastrnak and Geekie. Try it. Try it. Because the only thing that's been more frustrating about the Bruins' development over the last couple of years, the only thing more frustrating than their lack of an eye for talent, is that they won't give these guys a real shot. And, when Marco Sturm comes over, people are touting how he's developed guys in the Kings system. And they're right. Like he has, as I've just mentioned, he has. But so much of that development is crucial in the fact that they played with NHL guys. They played with actual skilled players around them. They got that chance. They weren't playing 16, 17 minutes a night. They were playing 13 minutes a night, just like Matthew Poitras and Fabian Lysell did towards the end of last season. Except they played those minutes with a Hall of Famer and Andrei Kopitar and another really skilled player, Byfield on one side and Kempe on the other, or Dustin Brown being on that line, savvy, captain, veteran. And the Bruins guys are playing with Marat Husnadinov. And if I had to guess, they'll probably be playing with guys like Sean Corrali and Tanner Jeannot instead of playing with some of the little amount of talent they actually really have. And when you look at the outlook of this Bruins team, it's like, are they going to be much worse if Matthew Poitras is playing some shifts on the first line than if, Elias Lindholm is playing some minutes on the first line? You know what I mean? Like, are they going to be worse by continuing to bury these guys down on the third and fourth line than they would be if one of them was playing on the first line or the second line every night? Would they really be that much worse? Would they be worse than 15th in the Eastern Conference? Or maybe all goes well, and by midseason, Matthew Poitras hitting his stride, and he's playing with guys like Pastrnak and Geekie, and it's working. And Fabian Lysell's a second-line winger. And Pavel Zacha's having a bounce-back year, and he's really helping bring this kid along. When you look at what Marco Sturm has right now, he's got something of a future here. Something of a future in that the Bruins are not in the 30s when it comes to prospect rankings. They're actually much higher. It's something I want to cover tomorrow. He's got some decent prospects here now. That if he develops them correctly, I think not only can the Bruins start winning, not Stanley Cup kind of winning, but, winning some games. But also, those guys he's developing now can pave the way for the great prospects that they will have in this pipeline. Guys like James Hagens, Will Zellers, hopefully, whomever the first-round pick is in next year's draft for the Bruins. This is where Marco has to win. The only way this era is a successful one is if he develops this young talent, because they spend up to the cap. They don't have an eye for talent. They don't make good deals in free agency. They're not going to plug these holes through shrewd asset management like the Panthers do. The Bruins can't do that. Don Sweeney can't do that. So maybe it's a tip of the cap to Don. He hired a developer here. He was cheap, and he'll do whatever Don tells him to, and that's probably why Marco Sturm's the coach. But he can develop some talent. And oh, by the way, just one last thing, because I got to get my cynicism in here somehow. If the Bruins do tank for Gavin McKenna, and they do have a bottom 5 record in the league, but he has developed some of this talent, they start winning some games by the end of the year, Matthew Poitras, a 40-point guy, then that's a win. That's a win. Because even if you do bring on, the Fraser Mittens and the Fabian Lysells and the Matthew Poitras and the Mason Lohrei of the world, and they all get better, and they all get better, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a playoff team. It really doesn't. Again, this is a long uphill battle for the Bruins. So you can even put yourself in a good draft position and still take a lot of positives away from the development of your team. That's where Marco Sturm can win. Okay. He doesn't come in here as this heavy defensive structured guy like some have talked about. He's not really that. He's not going to come in and completely elevate your power play. He's not going to do that either. But what he can do is he can develop these fringe NHL guys into real NHL guys. And then you've got something to look forward to towards the future that doesn't mean spending up to the cap any more than you already have. So let me know what you think in the comment section below. What do you expect from Marco Sturm this year? What do you think is the brightest part about Marco Sturm's hire? Let me know in the comment section below. Then be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you just can't wait for hockey to be back, no matter how bad the Bruins are going to be this year or how good. Okay, we're on the path towards 4,000 subscribers, and we're getting really close, y'all. Just over 100 subscribers away, so we need your help in getting there. We're here every weekday live at high noon Eastern time on YouTube, and then wherever you get your podcasts as well. I'm your host, Cam Stewart. That's why it's called The Cam Show. It is your direct alternative to Boston Sports Talk Radio, if you don't want to be listening to that anymore. Zach Burke is behind the glass, keeping us on the air. Check out the other videos on the channel, talking Bruins, Red Sox, everything else going on in the world of Boston sports.